Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here at the Spartan Rocketry Club, and I'm continuing my build of the Estes Great Goblin. And it is time, hopefully, to finish up the construction phase here. There are a couple little odds and ends to do. Um, we'll start off with dealing with however I'm going to attach this to a launch system when it's time to launch. Now, there are quarter-inch launch lugs that are included. But I'm also going to use a launch rail from time to time. So I'm going to put buttons on. This is not part of the kit. You need to buy these separately. Estes sells them now, although I don't get these from Estes for a variety of reasons. These are actually from Rocketarium. So we'll deal with this in a moment. Before I do any of this stuff, though, I do need to do a little bit of measuring. The instructions say that I'm going to be placing the launch lug well, one of them is going to go at the back of the rocket, which is good. Actually, sorry, no, it's going to go half an inch from the back, and the other is going to go 10 inches up. So I already have some lines drawn on this. Uh, this is mildly annoying because you actually kind of have to eyeball where the line goes in between the cuts in the tube. There is no line marking guide. So I didn't do the world's greatest job. It took me a couple of tries. So actually, that's not the one I wanted to do. It's the other one. I did put a little X to try to remind me of which one I wanted to use, but it turns out you actually have to pay attention to what you did in order for this to be of value. So let's put a couple more X's in here so I remember not to do that one. So in any event, as I was saying, yeah, so I had to make a couple cracks at it, and I looked at it and wasn't pleased with where it was, so I just drew another one. I have also set another line, 180 degrees around the tube, and this is where I'm going to put the rail buttons. So I'm not going to attach the launch lugs just quite yet. I want to show you the rail button approach. So this particular, you get two in a pack. You've got a part that's going to go on the inside of the tube, and this is the button itself. They fit together like so, and then you put a screw in here and tighten everything up, and that's how it holds together. If you haven't seen a launch rail before, these are becoming increasingly common, if not required, if you want to launch mid-power or higher. And there is very good reason for that. A quarter-inch rod is a pretty serious rod. But if you're going to be launching something like this particular rocket, it's still going to experience from time to time rod whip, which is when the normally rigid rod flexes as the rocket is going up it. So you get erratic flights this way. So if the rod is whipping back and forth as the rocket is traveling up it and it ends up like this, you're going to end up shooting it that way instead of straight up. So the rail, on the other hand, um, it's the kind that most rocket clubs use is called 1010. I don't. It's not 10 millimeters. It's bigger than that. It's about an inch square. In fact, I think it's exactly an inch square, and it has grooves right in the middle of it where these buttons slide in to the groove. So these are obviously they're a lot less obtrusive, so that and they're actually ones you can buy that are aerodynamically shaped instead of just being round. But the real benefit is that you're not going to get any rod whip with the rail. The rail is really rigid. It's like extruded aluminum or something similar, so it's pretty serious. But in any event, I need to get these in place. I'm not actually going to do all the work right now. I'm just going to eventually I'm going to drill it out with a power drill, but I have to figure out where I want it to be. So I have, let's see, just about enough space for this to fit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it basically as far in as it can go, and I have a push pin here, and I'm going to use the push pin to mark off where I want the pilot to be. Now, of course, be careful that you don't stab yourself in the finger doing this. I'm trying to go through somewhat gently. There we go. Oops. And if I did it right, yeah, it should fit pretty nicely. There is going to be a little bit that sticks out the back, and that's because the this metal part, right, is a little bit too long. That's okay. It's not really a problem. The other end of it, well, the real limitation is how far I can get my hand. And this is, it's a pretty big tube. It's 3 inches. I can get my arm like this far in. If you happen to be somebody who has more delicate arms, or you have access to someone who has more delicate arms, I have frequently hired out like kids or my wife whose arms are thinner than mine, and they can usually reach in farther. So anyway, the point is I was up to like here. I can reach most of the way in. So I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily put the other pinhole right here. And I should, yeah, I can easily reach. I've got another like inch or so that I can reach in. Eventually, I'm going to drill these out. I'm going to have to push this up through that hole, and that's how it's going to mount. But I'm not going to do that until everything is painted, because I don't want to paint the rail buttons. So in any event, I'm going to put the rail buttons away. I don't need them for the time being. I am going to do some gluing, though. And let's also make sure I get rid of the push pins so I don't push pin myself, which I have certainly done that before. All right. So back to the other side where I made marks. This should be quick and easy. I'm just going to grab my wood glue, and I'm going to put, probably helps if I have it open the whole way. There we go. I'm going to put a little bit of glue. I'm going to take the time to, that's the epoxy side. I'm going to spread this out, but I'm not going to do the 2-layer approach that I often do when using wood glue to attach things, because it's not as important. Hopefully it won't take a lot of abuse. I also have not checked for alignment yet. I'm going to put both of them on before I bother. So long as they're on the line, they should be close. By the way, I do have some rockets that only have 1/4-inch rod launch lugs, and I have some rockets that only have rail buttons on them. I've decided I put both on the last few rockets that I've built just for versatility. The launch lugs do cause some aerodynamic effects, like negative ones, and having them offset with rail buttons I don't think is the world's worst idea. So I think if you're going to have one, you ought to have the other. And as I said, it is increasingly common for clubs to require you to use a launch rod, or sorry, not a launch rod, a launch rail for anything that's mid-powered, so like E or bigger. It's really a good idea one way or the other. The only problem I will say is that most people don't have their own rail. Estes does manufacture one now that is reasonably priced. If you are a member of NAR, some years ago there was an article about building your own out of PVC tubing. I ended up doing that, but still, it's not a cheap project. It was about $80, I think, to do it completely from scratch, and the Estes one is more than that. But in any event, all that being said, I'm just looking down the barrel of the tube here to see how aligned the launch lugs are. They look pretty good. Check the other direction just to make sure. They look fine. You just kind of sight it in, basically, to make sure that they're on right. All right. The last little bit of construction work here before we go on to deal with the finishing steps is I need to put some pretty serious fillets on the fins. Now, one of them in particular, this guy right here, this one pulled out reasonably far away. That's kind of a problem. but it's not a problem that glue can't fix. I'm actually going to do that one last. I'm going to put fillets on the underface of this, we'll call it, because I don't want to mess with the launch lug, so I don't want to get anywhere near that right now. I considered breaking out this stuff for launch for my fillets. I almost always use this stuff, just a regular wood glue, and I think I'm going to continue with that. The only reason I could think to use the thicker glue is for that hole that I had. So this does, it's a liquid, right? I mean, the other stuff is too, but this is less viscous. The thicker viscosity stuff, I think, might have ended up making a better fill in that joint that was open. But this stuff's generally probably, I say I don't really know for sure, but it's probably going to make a nice smoother fillet. So that was my thinking. All right. So anyway, I am going to open the bottle a little bit more because apparently that wasn't good enough. And on goes the fillet. I'm going pretty heavy on this, and I'm going pretty heavy on it because it is a pretty big piece of wood. I want a fairly thick fillet, provided I can make it that way. What ends up happening here is kind of anybody's guess, I guess, but I do want to put on a decent amount of glue because I want a sizable fillet. I expect, especially with that part that had the gap in it, that I'm going to have to apply fillets more than once here. It is also worth noting too, the part I just did, it looks like there is a gap, and I mean there is, but it is actually full of transparent epoxy. So while the wood didn't completely get all the way down to where it probably should have been, there is a very strong bond there. So I'm less concerned about that. All right, anyway, yeah, you can see that that has already started to pull apart. So I'm just going to run my finger through this. I'm not going to push very hard. And I do need a paper towel, which probably should have had earlier. So yeah, you can see right there, I didn't fill that in the whole way. That's definitely going to need another application. But I'm just going to smooth this out gently. And I might even go over that, the excess glue. That's definitely going to need a second coat. What I really want to do is just ever so slightly remove the excess here. There's nothing wrong with transferring that excess into that hole because I have to fill that eventually. Oftentimes when I'm doing this, I'm more aggressive in smoothing these out. But I'm leaving a lot of glue this time. And that's fine because I want a fairly large fillet. And I expect that, spread that forward a little bit, that I'm going to have to apply multiple times. You can also see here, that looks like an air bubble, and it might be, but I don't think it is. I'm pretty sure that's a bubble in the epoxy. Not a bubble, like a glob. So I will definitely keep an eye on that, but I don't think that that's actually a problem with my fillet. Just to illustrate again, this is the one that was needing the most fill. Looks like it's pretty well patched at the moment. It probably will not. It'll probably settle, and there'll be a really obvious hole in the glue. And obviously we don't want that, so that's why I'm going to have to go with multiple layers. In any event, that's pretty good for now. Before I wrap this up, I did consider some alternatives to using the wood glue, any kind of glue, actually. Because I'm using mid-power on this, or intending to, mid-power composites, I considered reinforcing the bond here using epoxy clay rather than just wood glue. And that's an interesting substance. You can find some kind of epoxy clay probably at a big box hardware store. My experience with that has been not particularly great because that kind of, the brand I used anyway, was hard to work with. So it was a clay, yeah, but it wasn't like easy to sculpt. And the idea is that just like we use the clay in the nose cone um, to add some extra weight sometimes, you end up making a snake. So rolling it out, making a snake, and then making the snake the appropriate length, and then just pushing the snake in. That works pretty well, but the clay I was using was not particularly pliable, we'll say. And as a result, when I would push the clay in, and I was wearing gloves, right, because it's epoxy, I would end up kind of tearing up the gloves and leaving glove, like the nitrile in the glove would end up kind of making little canyons and ridges and things on my finger, and they would get transferred into the clay. So if you're going to use epoxy clay, make sure that you have one that's more for like sculpting rather than for fixing things that are broken, which is one of the main reasons you'd find at a hardware store. Do wear gloves. It's not, it's still got the agents that can cause skin irritation. So make sure you do that. I decided not to use epoxy clay because I think the limiting factor in this particular rocket is the motor mount. And the motor mount has cardstock, and cardstock is not terribly strong. It should be able to take the beating from a mid-power composite. But if I really wanted to do pushing high power, we'd want to replace the cardstock with plywood. So there's a limiting factor here, and it's probably not going to be the joint of the fin. So that was my thinking. All right. Anyway, all that being said, I do need to apply the last bit of. There we go. I do need to put a little bit more of fillet on this before we move on to the next step, and I'm also going to put a fillet around the launch lug once that's dried. So next video, we'll start finishing. Thanks for watching. See you then.